Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're connecting from. We're still joining in, so give me a few seconds before we get started. Okay, so again, good morning, or good evening, or good afternoon, depending on where you're connecting from. I'm connecting from Dublin, so welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us today, where we'll talk about when to do a social protection systems review and how can the ISPA tool CODI, which stands for the Core Diagnostic Instrument, help. Before I get started introducing our presenters, I'd like to thank the team at socialprotection.org for helping us today. And now let me welcome Adea, who's joining us from Washington, DC. Oh, sorry, let me get my bearings on the presentation. So Adea's the co-lead of the ISPA coordination team. She's a social protection specialist at the World Bank, where she has worked on many topics. Some of the most notable include social protection linkages to climate change, disaster risk management, and energy subsidy reform. She has operational experience from the, West Africa, Middle East, and North Africa, East Asia, and Europe, so pretty much everywhere. And she is, as mentioned, the co-lead of the ISPA coordination team. She has also led CODI applications in fragile settings. Let me introduce myself. My name is Veronica Lopez. I'm also from the World Bank. I've joined the ISPA team in 2016, and I'm currently supporting the development of two of the tools, forthcoming tools, which is the social assistance cash transfers and the social information systems. We may also be joined by Veronica Wozak. To make things complicated, we have two Veronicas. She is a social protection policy specialist at the ILO, where she has been working since 2007. She has served as a health policy officer, as a social protection floor officer, and social security expert. She's also part of the development of the social protection floors recommendation. And as mentioned, she's the other half of the ISPA coordination team. And she has been working on all of the working groups where ISPA tools have been developed, and is responsible for the development of another forthcoming tool, the social protection policy options tool. So welcome everybody, and thank you again. I just have a few announcements before we get started. Just as a reminder, the webinar is being recorded and will be available online after the webinar is over. Also, all questions are encouraged and welcome throughout the webinar. We want to answer all your questions, so we'll try to get through them during the webinar as well as at the end of the presentation. Please use, please use the Q&A button that should be on the bottom of your screen to submit your questions. And we will try to keep the webinar as dynamic as possible. So we'll try to adjust where we focus the presentation, depending on what the questions are. Also, as a reminder, you can find information about ISPA and CODI and the ISPA website, shameless plug, which is ispatools.org. Also, next week, we will have another webinar where we go through an example of an implementation of CODI in Uzbekistan. which was done in 2020, so pretty recently, and should be a very interesting presentation. I will also do my best at timekeeping, so without further ado, you can get started. And to set the tone, we wanted to hear a little bit about you first. So we prepared a few polling questions to know a little bit about everyone that's joining us today. So you should see a pop-up on your screen with the questions. And the question is, are you familiar with CODI or ISPA tools? And just give it a few seconds until we receive some of the votes. I see some are coming in already. Okay, interesting. I will share the results. Okay, we have a few. I think most have submitted your votes, so let me share the results. So we have quite a few people that are not familiar with ISPA nor CODI, so that is excellent because this is what we're here for. And some people have heard and have not applied, which will also be a big bulk of the presentation, the focusing on how to do an ISPA tool. Let me do just another question, just to learn a little more about who's joining us. And it is, what type of institution do you work in? Is it an international development institution, the government? Okay, we have received most of the votes. So I'll be sharing the results now. And we are, it seems like it's mostly international development institutions, which is great, but also a little bit of government, academic and research, NGOs, and other. So this is great because we, the tools are an involved process, so it's great to have a little bit from different areas. And just one more question. And it should pop up now. And that is if you're thinking of doing a social protection system review in the country where you work in. Oh, and these are coming in fast. Okay, we're almost everybody has answered. So let me, okay, oh, we still have a few more votes. Okay, I think we have most of them. So let me share the results. It seems most people are thinking of doing one. Some are maybe, and some not currently. And we also hope to address these questions because, or these questions in particular, because there's not a perfect time to do a review, but there's also not a bad time to do one. So we'll hopefully get to cover some of that. So now back to the presentation. If I can manage the technology today. Okay, well, welcome again, and let's, I'll just give you a brief glimpse of what we're gonna be covering today. So I'm glad that some people are not familiar with ISPA, so I'll be covering a little bit of what is ISPA. And then the big question in the main section, which is why and when to do a social protection systems review, and how can CODI be of help. We'll get into the theory of change in CODI and the conceptual framework. And then the other big important question, which is how to apply CODI. And then we'll try to leave some time also at the end for your questions, but we'll try to also address some of them during the presentation. So what is ISPA? ISPA, as the name stands, is the Interagency Social Protection Assessments. As the name states, it's an interagency collective of development partners who have created a set of tools to address and support challenges that governments face. And these challenges are fragmentation. Fragmentation can produce inefficiencies and duplications. And these duplications can be not only of the number of programs or overlapping programs, but also as well in administrative processes or administrative structures, which can translate into not only issues from the perspective of resource allocation and efficiencies in that sense, but potentially also can hamper accessibility for the beneficiaries who may have to navigate a very complex system, may have issues trying to access the benefits which they're entitled to, or may be burdened by multiple registrations. At the program level, we also see design flaws, where a program doesn't meet the needs of whom it's designed for, and thus becomes ineffective and doesn't meet the intended objectives of such program. And lack of coordination is also a very big one, which can happen at the national level between the corresponding national institutions, but also between international actors and donors, and also at the level between international actors and national institutions. So with that in mind, the objectives of ISPA tools are to provide a coherent framework to analyze at the three levels, at the country system level, a specific type of program or a set of programs, and their aspects of delivery, like the payment mechanism, the ID system, etc. And the second objective of the tool is to help countries identify the options to potentially improve the design of the delivery of the programs. So what do we mean by tool? It's not a software, it's not an actual physical thing, but it's a framework of analysis. And it includes a What Matters guidance note, which lays out the technical foundation. It lays out all it defines the criteria with which one can analyze the system, program, or delivery mechanism. It also includes a data collection framework, which is a set of a series of questions related to the established criteria. An overview of findings, which is a summary of the findings in each of the agreed criteria. And last, the overview of the country report, where one presents the findings and goes into what are the strengths and weaknesses of the analysis. It also includes an implementation guidelines that tie all of the sections together. And here's a quick glance at what ISPA tools we envision. Currently, The highlighted ones are the ones that are publicly available, which is the CODI tool, the one we're discussing today, the Core Diagnostic Instrument. We also have the Food Security and Nutrition, which is our newer tool, the Social Protection Public Works Programs, the ID tool, and the Social Protection Payments tool. And we have some currently in development, and we will be updating if you want to find these tools and want more information. Everything is on our website, so please go visit. So now to the main part: why and when to do a social protection system review. Adea, I pass you the mic. Let me know when you want me to change the slide, please.
Thank you, Veronica. Okay, and thank you to everyone for attending today. We're aware it's the middle of summer, but we've had several requests to have more informative sessions on ISPA, especially for new members joining the social protection sphere or members that have been around, to update them on the tools and any news related to the tools and any new implementations that can help them as they attempt to use our tools for their purposes, for their projects. And I think we already wrote in the chat, today we will be discussing the CODI tool overall, but please do join us on August 5th, where one of our colleagues who implemented the tool in Uzbekistan, which is a very interesting case, will be speaking about their experiences in using this tool. And they have recently published it in our website. But it's a good opportunity if you have any more specific questions once you get the generic understanding today, to follow up with more specific questions. Maybe they can be useful for you, the country you're working on, or certain aspects of it can be useful for you in the future. As Veronica mentioned, not all of the ISPA tools are completed. Some are under completion. And the CODI tool, it's a name that will hopefully you will hear over and over again now that you know it. It's the one that has been mostly utilized to date. And it's the only tool that is a systems tool. It looks at the system overall. We have several tools that look at programs, like the public works tool or the cash transfer tool that's upcoming, or aspects of the delivery chain, such as the ID system and payments and so on. So I will briefly speak about when and why to do such an assessment. And as Veronica mentioned, there is not one point in time where you can do when you can apply a CODI assessment, because it's such a systemic review. It has also been commended for it being such a big reference tool, because it was developed by over 20 organizations and social protection experts, that it was a very thorough process to ensure that all aspects of the social protection system are included. We've had cases where the government was speaking to one of the development partners, be it World Bank or ILO or WFP or whomever, and said, you know, we need to do an assessment. We need to know what the country has at its disposal before we do a reform, let's say. There's countries where they've done the tool once or twice, and they look at how things have changed over time. It's important to keep in mind that these tools, and especially as I saw from the polling, which was actually quite telling, that quite a lot of you are either considering or are in the process of considering using the tools. It's good to keep in mind that the tools are not meant to compare countries with one another. You see, it's a way of understanding what the country has at its disposal, so that you know what to concentrate on, or you know in your involvement with the government what aspects of that to concentrate on. So it's sort of a generic, and generic in the sense that it covers a lot, but it's also quite specific per each part of the social protection sphere, and we will talk about that later. So there will be, it includes a review of policy, governance framework, and programs, and implementation steps per program. So it's thorough in the sense that it looks at both the enabling environment as well as the delivery chain that allows these programs to reach the beneficiaries. As Veronica mentioned, it's CODI, as well as the other tools, are one of the biggest tools of promoting consistency and common language in the social protection sphere. You can go ahead. The theory of change. And this is quite important because as many of you are considering doing an assessment or a review, as we would like to call it more, sometimes the word assessment to the government can mean that we are judging or looking at how they are faring in comparison to other countries. So we tend to also adapt the term as well as needed. The idea is that with the information that's collected, and we will talk about what kind of information, how to go about collecting more information that you need. The idea is to sort of do a schematic of what exists in the country, which is very, for a lot of the countries, this has never been done. And I'll speak to it later. It doesn't mean that countries that are very developed have had this done, or if they've done it in a very small sort of manner. So the level of development doesn't necessarily mean that there will be more data. Sometimes there's no data. Sometimes there's more data. And so this tool allows you to have this big questionnaire, this big format that you can use to input all the information you have in the country, analyze it, and then hopefully the idea behind it is to help inform the government of what are the policy options that they can take. Now, this also depends on what the government wants to do. So if the government approaches the partner and says, look, I am trying to finally go through energy subsidy reform for the third time. We tried several times. We realized that we don't have enough information on, if we can utilize a cash transfer, if we can scale it up quickly. We need to understand how our systems are functioning. We need to know what we can do and what we should do before we do such a reform. So in those instances, it's quite ideal because you have this opportunity to thoroughly look at either one program or several types of programs within this social protection sphere, and you know what to concentrate on. And if you know the objective, you know what to concentrate on. In other cases, it may be a post-conflict country or other contexts like that you can adapt, and it depends on the objective that you want to reach. You can adapt the tool and say, okay, I will concentrate on this. And hopefully the idea is that this will help revise policy and help the government either, let's say, come up with new programs, adapt or change the ones that they have, work on the coverage aspect, work on the incidence aspect, work on the payments aspect. So the tool is, in that sense, allows both the government and the development partners to get a better picture of what is there to work with. And of course, the finance aspect and the budget aspect is key, as is with anything with social protection, as we all know. And this tool is one of them that has quite a thorough sort of framework to help you assess and be able to give guidance on that. So we can continue. So again, the CODI tool is the one that's a systems tool. The other tools talk about programs and delivery chain. Because it's a systems tool, what we advise our colleagues who are attempting to undertake this, we say that the best is to have an inventory of all the schemes that are in the country existing, but then concentrate on the few. Again, it depends on the objective. It depends on if you want to do a follow-up tool, if you want to do this as a thorough one and then do a payments one, or do an ID one, or use this one as a reference tool. So it depends on that. Then it helps you sort of assess how the national objectives are working against these criteria. Again, it's important to reiterate that it's not supposed to sort of assess how one country is doing versus another, but it is supposed to assess how this country is doing against these criteria that took ages to be developed by a lot of social protection specialists, because of, wording is important, what we include is important, how they're formatted is important. So these are, this is definitely not a World Bank tool. I have to say this from the beginning and constantly say it. It is, we jointly with the ILO, we make up a secretariat, but this is a public tool. This was developed by a lot of experts. And I have to reiterate this always when we apply these tools with the government. So to say that this is not a set of criteria that the World Bank came up with that we're assessing. These are important things to reiterate. And I can always, have one-on-ones if you want. Before applying these tools, Veronica and I are available, and we do give support to teams doing that. But this is one thing to keep in mind because it's quite important. And what's really important is you identify the policies and programs, and we write here implementation strengths and weaknesses. What we mean is along the delivery chain, along the delivery system, what are points of entry where we can improve before undertaking either a reform or a policy change, or understanding what we can use that we already have before creating new programs, or before scaling up, or before understanding how we can merge programs together or whatnot. And one of the most important things actually is the promotion of dialogue, exchange, and coordination between international and national partners. And I will talk about this later. This is actually really key because this tool is one of the ways where you can get a quorum of development partners on the ground and have several partners working together, not having, a World Bank, ILO, UNICEF, WFP, who all have their own mandates in a country, of course, but not produce the same things or double the efforts. So it's been a very nice experience in many countries actually that I've heard from, where on the ground there's sharing of information and then coming up with a product that can help the government overall, which is the aim. We will speak quickly about the conceptual framework and the key areas that make up the CODI. Our colleagues from ISPA.org shared the link directly to the CODI, and I invite you to look at it, of course, when you have your free time, and of course, reach out to us with any questions. So the idea is, as we mentioned, because it's a thorough tool, we look at the policy environment, we look at each program, and then we look at program implementation per program. So the idea is we start with, okay, what is available in the country in terms of legal aspects? Have there been any laws enacted since 50 years ago? Have there been any updates? Because this sets the tone, this sets the key for how SP is actually framed in a country. How is it, embedded in the laws? Is it sort of an afterthought? These are quite key because then we know how to, then that helps us determine what the dialogue will concentrate on with the government. Do we concentrate on the policy framework? Do we work on that first? Do we concentrate on the program first? So it's actually helpful in that sense because it helps both the team that are assessing and the government see where to begin with. Because unless we have that, then it's very difficult to come up with new programs that are actually active and functioning and reaching the intended beneficiaries, which is the bread and butter of social protection. And so these are the CODI has.
Interrupt. I'll quickly interject just because we received a question that is relevant to this section.
Absolutely.
Which is CODI seems to focus on social assistance. Given the missing middle vulnerable population in the informal, will CODI tool be modified to also consider social insurance, and especially when undertaking next steps in improving the system and ensuring coherence between social assistance, social insurance, post-COVID-19 and beyond. So just before we get to answering more in depth, I'd like to point out that CODI and all of the tools are living documents, so we're trying to keep them updated and constantly reviewed. So CODI will get a facelift soon. We'll try to better include these and other updates like shock responsiveness and among other improvements. And I'll give you back the floor, Ada.
No, no worries. And I believe it's Gabriel Fernandez. I believe we've met at one of the core courses in Washington, D.C. and have worked together. So good to see you, Gabriel. Indeed, good question. Perhaps I am concentrating on the social assistance aspect as well, too much, because that has been the majority of the use of the tool. However, the tool and the framework actually already includes questions on social insurance and labor. And this has happened in several countries where they want to concentrate on that, and they've concentrated on that. And I will speak to this a bit more in a bit, but actually this is a good time to ask this question because what I mean by framework is if you look on the link online, it's an Excel sheet that has a lot of questions. So it has a lot of questions per policy, a lot of questions for program design, a lot of questions for program implementation. And under policy and program design, you can have social insurance programs there. You can have labor programs there, absolutely. And if you do a thorough CODI one, you will of course include these because these are part of social protection. So maybe I have illegally only talked about social assistance, and thank you for pointing that out. And as Veronica mentioned, now that I have quite a few attendees, we would like to inform you that yes, we are in the process of finalizing as Veronica rightly called it, a facelift of CODI, because we've been told the CODI tool is quite thorough, but it also needs to be a bit more user-friendly. It needs to include more updates, and it will include modules, so questions or forms on gender, on disability, and on shock responsiveness. And this is thanks to all the feedback that we've received from implementers on the ground, and from governments who say, look, this is what's important for us now, and development partners saying, okay, gender is huge in our agenda. We would like to see it somehow sort of featured in these tools. Let's not reinvent the tool. We've spent a lot of time making these tools. They've been very useful. How can we make sure that we have these aspects mainstreamed? And that's what's happening actually right now. So this is a very good question. And apologies if I've been very social assistance heavy. Okay, Veronica, you can continue. And as I mentioned before, there is a set of performance criteria that is included in the CODI tool. They are listed here. I won't go over them in too much detail. And as I mentioned, these criteria were heavily scrutinized and decided upon by several organizations, and it was a very open system. To be honest, there have been cases where CODI, to do a full CODI, it's important to look at the performance criteria and then assess how the country is standing against these. There have been cases where CODI has been used partially as a reference tool and not used in the criteria. So that's also one option. However, we don't count that as a full implementation of a CODI tool, but you are welcome to use sort of the CODI questionnaires to your liking and not do a performance criteria review. Just do a desk review if you need, as let's say if you are in a pre-appraisal mission, and that would be helpful for an operation coming up. Continue, Veronica. How to apply the CODI. So this is actually, since I have everyone's attention, we are actually coming out with a video as well, thanks to our partners at ISPA.org. We've been told to try to make these tools more user-friendly, more sort of catchy, and a video has been sort of voted as a mean of making it more accessible, and you can go back to it, back and forth. And the idea behind it is to explain that, yes, it can look a bit daunting when you first open it because it's so thorough, but it can be quite adaptable as well. So for example, it can be adapted to different scenarios. For example, I will mention one now. We are, and by we, I mean the World Bank, World Food Program, and UNICEF are working together in Libya. And I'm sure a lot of you know that it has a myriad of crises and difficulties. So implementing a tool or an assessment of some sort or a review in such cases is commendable in itself, because it is quite difficult during COVID as well. But in such instances, you can concentrate on a particular aspect of the social protection system. So you can assess the continuity of operations and availability of capacity to support humanitarian intervention, or you can concentrate on what social assistance programs are there so that the country can undertake energy subsidy reform. So you can adapt it in that sense. It is flexible enough to allow you to do that. And where to begin? So for every tool that we have under the ISPA partnership, these are key. These 3 points are quite key. The first one is to secure strong government ownership of the process. So for instance, when you identify a CODI as a tool for your work in a specific country, it's essential to inform the government that it is happening for many reasons. There can be it can be demand push or demand pull or supply push, in the sense that you can suggest it as a development partner. Look, there is this tool that we've used in these countries. We've seen some good results. It's quite thorough. It's a good reference tool. It can help us understand things. Or the government counterpart has heard about it or has seen it or asks for some sort of a tool, and you can suggest it. And the reason I'm saying it's essential is because in addition to transparency, ensuring that this data is being used for a review, and you also get the most up-to-date information to ensure that actually the tool is as useful as possible. And most importantly, and the objective of this tool is, this will ensure the likelihood that the findings will inform the design of the system, program, or delivery mechanism. So that the tool is useful in the sense, and the theory of change that we talked about earlier can be applied here. So this is for all the tools, especially for CODI. And the second thing that's really important, this is with any tool, again, but very important for CODI, it's also to think of a team of experts that will carry out this work. And by the team of experts, we mean the team needs to be considered carefully, depending on the tool and the objectives that you're trying to achieve. So you may need a diverse set of skills in the team, public administration, law, ICT, if you're doing an ID or the payments. So for CODI, for instance, again, I go back to the Libya example. The objectives were laid out by the government. They said, we are considering energy subsidy reform in the future. There are quite a few things happening at the same time. We have quite a few difficulties. With that in mind, we sought to build a team around social assistance expertise, but also a team that has the language skills, because that was crucial for us to have someone. Unfortunately, during COVID, most of the data collection and most of the analysis had to be done via phone. And we can talk about that later. But having the language requirement was essential, because a lot of the documentation was actually shared via Facebook, the Facebook groups of the ministries, as opposed to official documents. And so you had to adapt how you collect the data. You had to adapt how to find best ways of getting that information, the most updated information from a country that has a lot going on. And it's also on the same example, I can also bring it up here. It's crucial to coordinate with partners on the ground, as I mentioned before, because sometimes, let's say, the World Bank has presence on the ground, but works with one ministry. ILO can work with another ministry. The WFP can work with another body. UNICEF can work with another body. It's not always the same. And so what we did, which could be helpful as you attempt to implement these tools or are thinking about it in the future, is informing the partners on the ground that this work is upcoming. See if there are any partners that want to join. For example, we used the Social Protection Cash Working Group, where we presented, okay, this is what we're planning to do. We've been invited by the government. Would anyone like to join in this effort? Has anyone started this? So we don't double our efforts, and we make sure that the information we collected is updated, is as thorough as possible, and we don't sort of waste precious time and come up with, with very fragmented advice from the development partners. So in that sense, it's actually a very good coordination tools for us on the ground, for all of us. And the last point that's important to keep in mind for all of these tools is that they are meant to be applied through a participatory process throughout all levels of administration as possible. And we can talk about this later. Having workshops with different stakeholders throughout the process is very important. Having workshops at the beginning, let's say, for fragile contexts such as Libya, we had to do it online during COVID. For for other countries that this happened in, it was beneficial to, of course, do it in person, either to meet the different stakeholders or to validate the information, and just keep the dialogue going, and ensuring the government this is not, again, a comparison tool.
Just to add
yeah.
on that point in particular, not only the end result is important, but the process also becomes a very important tool for coordination. And also, we have two other questions that are sort of related to this point. Well, one is, if you want to use this tool for the purpose of a master thesis, is this possible? From what I understand, there is a whole team required to do an evaluation of this sort. Must the government know in this case? So in this case, it's not, if you're implementing it in a country, it is very important to have for it to be participatory. But if you're using it more as a reference document, then it can't be used. You can simply refer to the matters guidance note and the type of questions. But for carrying out a more in-depth analysis, I would suggest to go with a team, especially to fill out to have a very wholesome view. Note if you want to add something. Then we also have another question.
I can add just something quickly. I was referring to it earlier as a reference tool, and as such, it can definitely be used as something where you conduct a desk review. If it's not an official, let's say, implementation on the ground, it can certainly be used as the framework can be taken to better understand what exists in the country. And if it's helpful to you in that sense, please do let us know, because we'd love to hear it, actually.
Yeah. Just another, we're always looking for feedback, so please feel free to contact us with any inputs or questions or any sort of feedback that you have. We also have another question, which is the efficiency in the delivery process also considered as a performance criteria in CODI? And related to this point, I would just like to add that it's not, that you can also combine, in my experience, unfortunately not with CODI, but with other tools, you can combine quantitative or qualitative tools to make the results more enriching it. And also in cases where you can't find a lot of information, you can always get creative and complement information. Ade, I don't know if you want to add something to this.
No, that's actually a very, very good point you made. I was just reading now I see where the comments are coming in. Sorry.
Oh.
when I was speaking, I was like, where do you see these comments? Okay. So now I saw another question from Irene. Can the tools be used to compare the coherence of SP systems between two or more countries? Would it be useful to take lessons from one system to improve another? Absolutely. And actually, this can be a side piece. So we do this quite often with our involvement with the government, and we say, okay, so this is the assessment that we have. This is where the country stands right now. How about we come up with best practices from different countries? But this is after the fact. So once you analyze the system and you see what they have at their disposal, and they say, oh, well, it looks like, we need a registry, or it looks like our payments is not functioning well, or it looks like, we don't have the capacity to reach out more people. How do we do that? And that's sort of an add-on. And that's what CODI is actually really, really good for. As you say very rightly, it's not meant to compare countries, but it gives you a starting point to then follow up with the government and say, okay, as you can tell, what would be beneficial in this case would be to work on this. So we have the best practices from these countries, and that can help them supplement and work on a specific aspect of it. But the tool itself doesn't have the capacity to sort of directly recommend things, because it's a country by country basis. So I hope that clarified it a bit. Veronica, feel free to add more.
Sorry, I'm having technological issues. I've lost my mouse. Okay, I'm back.
We can continue or, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so the data collection phase, we talk about four important things. The adaptation of the data collection framework, the desk review, the interviews, and when possible, the site visit and group focus group discussions. So if you can, yeah, or just go back one. Sorry. So when we talk about adaptation, we are talking about the tool itself, and the tool has this big Excel sheet that I mentioned. It's thorough in the sense that it allows you to look for a lot of information that is relevant to the objectives of the work. But then again, perhaps you don't need all those, and that's fine. And you can adapt and say, okay, as Gabrielle mentioned before, I want to concentrate on social insurance, fine. And then you look at questions that are relevant for social insurance, and you concentrate on that. And you make that the basis of your assessment. It would be beneficial to, of course, so there's three modules: policy, as we mentioned, program, and delivery chain. The policy one is actually quite important to do regardless, because you get an idea of how things are framed, how updated they are, and if there's anything that needs to be done at that level, because that will determine how much you can do at the other two levels. Under the program, you can adapt and say, okay, you delete questions that are irrelevant for your purpose or your context, highlight what is of particular importance, and you can always add questions that may be missing. So in the overall country report, you can say, oh, well, this is a new thing that just appeared now. It's important to highlight this, and that's totally fine. That's advisable as well. So once you have an idea of the objective that you're trying to reach, the programs that you're interested in, then what is really important, especially in countries that have very limited data, is to try to do as much of a desk review as possible. So, and by desk review, we mean, as I mentioned before, speak to the partners on the ground, have either one-on-one discussions with them, or have a workshop where you say, okay, this is the objective we're trying to achieve. The government wants us to help on this. Is there any assessment that has been done? Is there any new household survey? Is there anything on vulnerabilities that we can use? Is there any updates on what the government wants to implement in the future? Because sometimes they come up with these notices and informations that, okay, we will implement a new cash transfer by 2023. You will cover this many people. Any information on that? Because it will be good to pre-populate the questionnaire that you have as much as possible. So with whatever readily available information you have from statistical offices to ministries, to your institution, to other institutions, to academia, to whatever you have on the ground. And it's quite important to keep the sources carefully recorded. And I will explain why that later. So once you have this objective in mind, you adapt the questionnaire, you pre-fill it as much as possible. Then what's really helpful is, go for it, Veronica. And then you can plan interviews. And what we mean by interviews is, okay, what are the relevant institutions in the country that can help us with this assessment? Is there a National Economic Board, Ministry of Social Affairs, Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Women and Children, different types of ministries, statistical office? Is there a different body that is there zakat? So it really depends on the context of the country and what is considered as a social protection body, either financing or program and delivery, either coordination bodies that deal with laws and regulations, so all of these. And so what is key is to have a focal point in the ministry that you are working with most closely, and have them come up with a list of focal points in the relevant bodies that you can interview. And the reason I mentioned is to pre-fill the data beforehand is because when you go to these interviews, then you have an idea of, okay, right, we don't have information on this. Let me concentrate this interview on these types of informations, and then be ready to follow up with them as much as possible. Say, okay, it seems from the desk review that none of the other organizations could get information on this. It would be key to get information on this. Or one source of ours told us that you're envisaging this program. Can you tell us more about this? So sort of using what you already have to try to fill those data gaps with these interviews is quite essential. And then once you have these interviews done, what is really beneficial is when you have a sort of a draft of this assessment and of the country report, as Veronica mentioned earlier, that will be sort of the basis of this tool. You can then have a workshop which validates the information. And this is really key. In a lot of the countries where we've applied these tools, having a validation workshop, which means prior to sort of finalizing this tool, is quite essential, because you get everyone around the table and say, okay, this is what we've come up with. Is there anything we're missing? Is there anything that has happened in the meantime? Did we get anything wrong? And it's this continuous trust building with the government, where you're being transparent about the information you have, how you're using it, and then they are part of this participatory process with you. And in cases where it's possible to have site visits with beneficiaries and focus groups, that's ideal. That doesn't happen always, especially, I mean, during COVID with applications, this was impossible, or in different contexts, it's impossible, but it can be done via phone or via online meetings. It's quite important to also ideally get the feedback, but again, it depends on the objective of this assessment. So what is the government trying to do? Are they trying to come up with a new big scheme? And if that's the case, then let's look at what other schemes, what happened, what worked, what didn't work, what are some delivery chain mechanisms we can reuse, what are some we can adapt, what are some we can improve. So sort of not to start from scratch. So that's ideal. I'm going to check. I think there was another question. I know. So again, as we mentioned before, once you have all this information, you look at the assessment criteria, and you see how the country is faring against these criterias, and you draft the country report with those criteria in mind, saying, okay, this is what we know on the policy, this is what we know on the programs, this is what we know on the delivery chain, and these are the points of entry where either dialogue with the government of the partner that's doing this tool can continue, or the government can take this and say, okay, I will think about this and concentrate on, okay, my priorities for the next 5 years on this and this and this. I will try to fit this into those priorities. It often happens that we say, okay, well, it's important to have some sort of a registry. It's important to have some sort of an ID. It's important to have a better understanding of what payment systems work in this country. Is there internet penetration? Is mobile, all of these things can sort of set the ground for extra work related to social protection. And quite often when you do a CODI, you get to have, let's say, people from the Ministry of Finance, people from infrastructure, who have never really paid attention to social protection, and get a better understanding of, wow, this is quite important. We can use these systems for other things as well. We can tag on other things. So, I mean, for me, it's quite nice to see that you get more traction that way, but it can help generate sort of more consensus within the government as well, especially when it comes to finance. There have been cases where the government has decided to keep the tool outcomes and the recommendations private. And this is, again, their choice. We had recently done this in some Middle Eastern countries. They didn't want to share the results, and that's fine. But we encourage our colleagues who are trying to do the tools to share if possible, because it helps, again, come up with best practices. It helps understand how countries are faring, to their own objectives, but also how it helps sort of set a benchmark to then go back and look at it after a few years, after certain reforms have been done, to see how what was the sort of the intended impact, if any, or if it has to be done again. So we encourage that, and we do, if you hear of countries that have applied this, since I still have your attention for a few more minutes, please do let us know. The way we find out about these applications, unfortunately, we can't find out through the system because it doesn't keep track. It's a public good, and you can download it, but we wouldn't know if it's done. So if you have done, or if you are doing it, do reach out to us. We'll be happy to answer questions as you're doing it, but also let us know if it has been completed so we can share it and sort of keep our database and our information as updated as possible. Veronica? You can skip this. Yeah. Again, the final report and dissemination, just reiterating what I said. The final report usually includes quite a lot of consultation with the stakeholders that you've involved from the beginning. So hopefully it doesn't come as a shock to other partners on the ground that this has been done by either one institution or several institutions working together. And it can then be used for each institution's work. It will be a joint work that can then help each institution's mandates with however they want to proceed. So it's, in that sense, it is a thesis that can be used so it's actually not a, I'm going to use that in the future. And yeah, happy to answer questions for whoever is still online and has still patience during the middle of summer. And again, yeah.
Question. Well, we have two questions. Just to finish, I didn't fully answer is efficiency in the delivery process also as a performance. CODI. Efficiency per se, it can be there's a cost effectiveness module, but also there's a module on program design and program implementation. So in that sense, you do look at the different stages in the delivery, and you can identify if there are any issues or any pain points for the beneficiaries. And then the next question is sort of related, but it can in terms of it's answered in the same module. There's one that says, how can we focus on needy people as targeted group versus universal coverage on the basis of age limit? Some Dalits and people of Karnali zone never cross the proposed age limit. This, I think he mentioned they're from Nepal, such as life expectancy of Dalits only 56, while in Dalits get social protection in age of 60. So in this case, I think, well, one can look at the program design module and the eligibility criteria in the program. One can also analyze with other information, beneficiary information, such as geographic coverage or sociodemographic information, to compare and see if in fact it would be better to adjust the categorical targeting by age and refine that. So yeah, one can focus and one can look. One can use only that module or the tool or the entire tool, which looks at the entire aging, the entire system. Sorry, I was reading the next question.
The next question on aging. Yeah, if I may add a bit more, that's a very good question from Kathmandu. And indeed, you can look at the program-specific eligibility criteria, but it will also be beneficial to look at the policy aspect. So say there are maybe competing regulations or laws that are not well aligned, or there's one law that supersedes another one when it comes to eligibility, or what is the cutoff age for social insurance and whatnot. So these are good starting points where, and as I mentioned before, it's important to look at the policy as well as the program before recommending something to the government, because unless you understand, unless you understand what is available in the country, then you don't know how to proceed, because maybe the program was developed recently and the law is something that's hindering it. So that is those are two things that go hand in hand.
We also have another question, which is, do you have the aging module developed? Let's see, this is a contentious question since it is one of the topics that we would like to integrate in all tools, but as a module itself, not yet.
So yeah, thank you, Shalika, for the question. This has been coming up. We were thinking of having a tool in itself that covers aging, but I think just as I mentioned with the CODI tools that has 3 aspects being integrated or sort of added on. Aging is one of them, where it is being linked to social insurance more, and there's now working groups discussing this. So it is in the process. It's one of the things that has been quite discussed, and even more so during COVID, where social insurance mechanisms were used, or sort of made more flexible as a response mechanism as well. So actually, we're learning quite a lot from what's actually still happening, and that will help feed into the adaptations that we will do to the tools. But it's a very good point.
Yeah, it has also come up. I've been implementing a payments tool, and that's also an aspect that has been very important when we look at the social protection system in the country. As for most countries, it is one of the social insurance and pensions and social pensions are one of the biggest programs. So it's definitely something that we would benefit from having a more consolidated framework to include as part of the analysis. So the floor is open for any other questions. In the meantime, I would just like to thank everybody for joining. Oh, we got another one. Let me type. How did you ensure an inclusive research in the case of Libya while doing the data collection by phone, while many parts where the most needy might be there are not covered by phone networks? And that is an interesting adaptation that one has to do. I'll leave you Adele to answer, and I can complement with other experiences.
Thank you, Soha. I hope I pronounced that well. Again, a very good, very tough, and very timely question. All the data collection covered the east of the country. And so working with the government that is currently there, we had access to what the government gave us access to, right? And the data collection, and we did a household survey. So one good thing about CODI is it can be sort of implemented or used in tandem with other tools. Let's say you want to do a household survey on vulnerabilities, and you want to use CODI as well to better inform reform efforts, or to better get an understanding of how the country is doing as much as possible. But in the case of Libya, and I'm sure you know, there's so many different layers of things to consider and things to keep in mind. So you choose to be as thorough as you can with what you are able to grasp. I was very impressed that, to be honest, with electricity shortages they were encountering, with COVID, with the oil price problems, with, of course, unrest, and during Eid, we were able to get information. And I've never seen that before. I was so impressed. And it was the first time that such an assessment was done. And all the information that we've had on the country has been outdated by 20 years. And so it was really good that we managed to get interviews with government representatives, first focal points, But then for the household survey, so for the CODI, you mostly speak to focal points, right? So you don't talk to households in this case, because you couldn't do any focus group, it was impossible. But through our secondary, our add-on, our sister assessment of vulnerabilities, household vulnerabilities, we were able to speak to households. And I was very impressed that we were managed to do that. That was through the statistical office, using sort of their networks and using their mechanisms. And so again, you adapt and you use as many means and as many regions as you agree with and have access to. But that's this was one of the cases where I think it was probably one of the most difficult, but at the same time, I believe most beneficial, because even within the ministries, they weren't aware of the programs. And so not only is this helping development partners understand what is there to work with, it's helping the government understand what they actually have. And some of the things are really well established. Some are not activated, some can be activated. So, but again, most of the information we got was from the East.
I can just compliment that that's one of the challenges currently that many of us are facing, and one might have to give up the fidelity of the information just because one is not going to be able to reach the more vulnerable sectors of the population, and which usually a focus group or in-person interviews may be necessary to gather the information, but right now no one wants to put anyone at risk. So that's definitely something that as researchers we need to include in when we're designing our data collection tools. So just always keep in mind all of the, and especially once you have the country context, and you learn, especially if you're working with local organizations, that's very helpful in making sure that that we can, how one interprets the information and what sort of things unfortunately cannot be captured. So one has to be also flexible in that sense. Before everyone leaves us, we have one more polling question. If you can help us answering. And this is about learning also from your challenges, and what are your challenges. Not only, it doesn't have to be necessarily an ISPA tool, but like what have been the challenges in doing a systems review or similar analysis in your country. We're getting some interesting answers. We have oops, I lost the control of the okay. I think we're getting a few more votes. I'll give it a few more seconds to so that we get a few more and end the poll and share the results. I think I mean, this shouldn't be this should be a multiple choice. One should be able to select multiple issues because we usually face all of them. Okay. You got quite a few questions. I'll share the results. So we have all of the all of the issues represented, and with evidence-based decision-making or performance tracking not strongly institutionalized in the country. I think these are all speak to well, constraints to find necessary funding, lack of necessary expertise, and difficult to commit the necessary time and relevant stakeholders. I think these all are very representative of, of the challenges we all face. If there are not any other questions, just let me double check. Just another reminder for everyone that next week we'll have another webinar focusing on the experience of adapting and implementing a tool in the context of Uzbekistan. Please stay tuned. Also, again, thank you everyone for joining us and sharing your questions. Please, again, feel free to contact us via the ISPA website if you're interested in implementing one of the tools or would like to share feedback. We always welcome all information. So very thankful. Also, some of the tools are available in French and Spanish. And as mentioned earlier, the CODI tool is also in the process of being updated. So stay tuned. We're trying to always update and include more information and maintain the tools current. And with that, I think we can end a little early. So I'm happy that we managed to answer all your questions. And with that, we can end the webinar. Thank you so much, Adea, Karini, and Fernanda.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you for all the really relevant questions. It's also good for us to keep thinking of these things. And please, as Veronica mentioned, do reach out via the website. There's a link for the information if you have it any before taking on board these tools. And stay tuned for more webinars coming up, one next week and then in the fall. And if you have any ideas of particular webinars you want to concentrate on, we're happy to do them too. So have a good summer as well.